thank Uncle Todd, because Uncle Todd gave a guy that his success in school was that I was accepted at Dartmouth 3 times, but I never graduated. And I lived primarily the adult part of my life before I worked for the PD complex in Alberta. And Nina, where's Nina? Right there, somewhere, other yard, Sherm's daughter. And I lived with Sherman and Claire and their family in the summer times working, and I actually spent one whole year out there working. And then I met Adrian, and that was the end of the ranching. And I came back to Minneapolis, and somebody set a rule that I had to interview with like 3 or 4 people to be sure I was human. And I know one of them was Uncle Charlie Bell at General Mills, and I don't remember, and Mr. Bennett, who was a mining guy down in South America. And then I went to interview with Uncle Todd, and Uncle Todd offered me a job, and that first job was in the Peace River, which is about 200 miles northwest of Edmonton, a little town of Rycroft, and I spent the winter of 61, I guess it was, in Rycroft, shoveling grain. I never wore shoes. I wore mucklucks or a moccasin. The temperatures got down to still temperatures 54 below zero, and it was a wonderful way to start in a career. I think Uncle Peavy was really, really thrilled when the manager had a stroke, and I was the manager, and I sent a car of grain in the middle of the winter to Churchill, Manitoba, to go out Hudson's Bay. It wasn't going to see any water for 7 months. Instead to Vancouver, where obviously there was, I was told not to do that again. And I spent a couple of years in Canada, and Adrian and I were married, and living in Winnipeg, not working for George directly, because obviously he was the boss and I was the peon at the bottom. But I was going to buy a house, and Fritz Corrigan, who was head of PD at that time, heard about this and said, no, he's being transferred to Alton, Illinois, which is a suburb of St. Louis. And Adrian and I were in Alton for 13 years, and I was asked to start a barge line, and that worked out really well. Came back to Minneapolis, and this is in the late 70s, and in 1982, and I was really ticked off. It's not what I would say it differently if you weren't all here. And ConAgra made motions to buy the PV company, and I was hurt. I thought maybe I'd be president of PV company when I was 55 or something. I was 20 at the time, and anyway, that was the greatest move for me, and I think for the shareholders, of which a lot of them are in the room, for PV company. The guy that ran ConAgra was a guy named Charles Michael Harper. He had been with Pillsbury and had left Pillsbury. He ran their chicken business. They sold the chicken business. He lost his job, went to work in 1973 for Nebraska Consolidated Milling, which became ConAgra. And he was like my father, who had died in 78. And the ConAgra of Mike Harper was the most exciting. I couldn't imagine a place in this whole world where there was as much energy and take a risk. I mean, they had a philosophy book, and in that book, they talked about taking a risk, because if you don't take any risks, you don't ever go anywhere. Now, you take risks, you win and lose. You've got to win more than you lose. But it was a very constructive, challenging thing, and I loved it. And sadly, Mike Harper died 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, last spring. And in ConAgra, I don't own a single share of stock in ConAgra brands. It's just all canned goods and frozen goods, and it is not flour milling anymore. In fact, talk about an insult to me. Not a single business, and I was in charge of all trading and all flour milling of corn and whatever it was, oats, all the international businesses, and not one of them is still there. They sold them all. I guess they either missed me or hated me.
Healthy choice, Mike Harper.
Oh, yes. Mike Harper in 1985 or 86, 2 or 3 years after I joined, had a heart attack, and he went to the company. We were just experimenting with packaged foods. We had Banquet, which we owned, which is an old company, and that was all. And he said, I just had a heart attack and I can't eat any of the foods that we manufacture. And his wife, Josie, who was the most ideal, lovely, loving CEO's wife you could possibly imagine, had cooked I think it was a turkey chili. And it was packaged in a green, Healthy Choice colors. And green was not popular in frozen food or packaged goods. And it was called Josie's Chili, not Healthy Choice, Josie's Chili. And it was a little cup with a pull top. And that was the origin of Healthy Choice, which was just James Conagra. And it was sold, in green, which no one thought we could do. And I was never involved in the packaged food, so I don't know much more about it than what you could read in the press. But that was the origin of how Conagra got into the packaged foods.
Where's Peavy Lake?